Okay, and now we'll talk about Annalisa's work. And here's her first one for symmetrical balance. And I will agree that this is pretty much a perfect symmetrical balance. T- technically, there's a little bit throwing the symmetry off. This is what we would actually call approximate symmetry because, the left side and the right side aren't identical. They're just very, very close. The reason, and that's actually a good thing because it makes it more interesting. One of the problems with symmetry is that um, it can be a little boring. Um, so, except I just realized this is more vertically symmetrical. Yeah, this is working as symmetry with a vertical axis. It's not symmetrical with a horizontal axis. But let's just go ahead and discuss it as a vertical axis, which it is, and that you've got this kind of hot spot right here, which in this particular case, it's probably not working all that well. As an element, but it is kind of some kind of variety. One of the problems with symmetry is sometimes you can have too much unity and they become boring. And that's the trick with symmetry. It's the trick when you're taking a perfectly symmetrical image. How are you going to make that interesting? Because it's a little tricky to do. And so something like this can kind of shift the balance around just enough that it's interesting. Now that said, before I move on, there's just a couple of other things I want to point out. Um, this is as far as lighting is concerned, I'm not sure well, first of all, I think your white balance is really warm. And it's again, it's just kind of underexposed. This light here, this reflection, even though I used it as an example of something to create a little bit more interest, it's technically it's really not working as an element in this one. And when you've got a glare like this, you can either, if you can't make it work in your favor, make it go away. Well, how would I do that? Well, first of all, I would turn this light off. Well, then there's not going to be enough light in the room. Well, bring your ISO up. You could do that. Find another way to introduce light into the room. This is another thing we want to try to start paying attention to and avoiding is harsh shadows. And I have not talked to you guys about this, so I'm not trying to um, beat you down or anything like this. It's just stuff that we need to start thinking about. This is the kind of thing that we generally want to avoid is harsh shadows. And this is the reason that I said um, if you're going to shoot in daylight, in the middle of the day with the sun directly above, do it on a cloudy day because that diffuses the light and it softens or eliminates the shadows. And when you have a really harsh glare and a harsh shadow, I mean, it almost looks like maybe you used your flash on this. I don't think you did. I think it was just the light in the room, but um, it's it's kind of it's kind of let's think about like trying to find ways that we can get it to glow. Well, how do I do that? Well, trial and error. um, I think that maybe uh, getting your exposure for what's happening in here. This is super, super dark. This is an area that could probably be edited, or maybe you could let in a little bit more light. Maybe zoom up to the television closer so you can't see the background at all, and then you don't have to meter for anything but the television. That might be one thing you could do. Okay, this one's much more attractive image. Is that in Houston? That looks like, let's see here. No, this reminds me of something in Houston, but let me just read this real quick. It's a cage. Okay. Well, it reminds me of something, but it's very, very nice. This one just kind of, the composition just immediately appealed to me. Um, it's a very linear image. And we're going to do an assignment soon that deals with lines. And yes, of course, your symmetry is working nice, split right down the middle, nice horizontals here. Got to really, look at the geometry here. You got a almost perfect square and then a perfect triangle on top, and then you've got the three arches. This looks a lot like classical architecture, and of course all the tension that they paid to balance in those. So very nice. White balance is icky. It's a it's a little bit brown orange. Maybe you want that, but um, I think before we start trying to like get a sepia effect or whatever, we need to first just know how to get good white balance without any cute tricks. That stuff is really fun. It's also really easy to do. So I'd like for you to, play around with your white balance a little bit. And also this right here is something that could probably be avoided either by moving in just a little closer. It's kind of unfortunate that it's right there because it does make your job a little bit more difficult. If we, I really wasn't going to go into a whole lot of you know ways to change up your picture with Photoshop, but honestly, this would be real easy to fix because they've got this. It's called content aware editing, and you can actually select this thing and move it to an area that looks a little bit more like what you want it to look like, and it'll fill it in. It's really great. I don't know if it would work that great for this one, but it's just one of those things I want to think about. Could probably use a little bit lighter on this one. It's a little dark. Moving on. Okay, good. This is a good composition. Okay, it's. I would like to see the tabletop maybe glowing just a little bit more. This is super super dark. I think it's supposed to be, but I think that maybe just a little bit more detail either in the background or in what's going on down here. It's just one or the other. I think having them both super flat is a little bit of a just a little bit of problem. Another thing I might suggest is just zoom in a little bit more so that this takes up just a little bit more space, or um, let's do some editing to this so that we can bring out some of the highlights. This stands out beautifully. This, it's not as important as this. This is your focal point. But this here and what's on the tabletop here, all of this supports the focal point. And it could be just a little bit more detailed, I think. And we could mask this out. We could take a mask in Photoshop and cut it around this whole area. Okay, let's see. Rule of thirds vertical. Okay, good. 1, 2, 3. And then also you've kind of introduced a diagonal in here too, which breaks up the monotony of the perfectly 3 rectangles in a row kind of thing. So that's nice. Okay, this one's nice as well. It's hard to tell when they're this small. I would probably say this has a lot of potential. I would probably want to just play around with that flower a little bit more. I mean, I think that this one, it is intentional that you have this super, super flat black background and the extreme, black, white is really powerful. And having that much contrast means that your focal point can be pretty small and hold its own against this great big, area of black right here, because when we talk about balance, if you're using the rule of thirds, well, something needs to happen in the smaller third that balances out with the bigger third. So if we took a look at what's happening in the other bigger two-thirds, I'm sorry, the other two-thirds of the space, there's nothing. It's just basically, you could fill it in with a rectangle. And I think maybe you could afford to, you know, break into this space just a little bit more, because I think we're going to kind of read the axis of this flower as being delineating that third mark. And if that's the case, I think the flower could be just ever so slightly bigger. Also, just to make a little bit more balance between what's happening up here and what's happening down here. We don't want them to be the same. But it just feels like there might be a little too much black space down here. See where I'm drawing my circle right here? That's about how big and about where I think the flower should be. And then, I'll have to see this when I look at the raw file, but this is the kind of thing that you you know to get this right, it needs to be really, really super sharp focus, and a lot of interesting things need to be happening in here, and you can have a lot of fun playing with that in Photoshop. Okay, but very dramatic. This one's got a lot of drama to it. Okay, good. In balance, yeah, you've got kind of this, it's a little bit of a diagonal thing, but you've got this kind of, with the horizon kind of dipping a little bit. It does kind of throw you off a bit. This one was kind of hard to do. I know. I would probably say it would be really nice to take like a brush and come in here and use one of the brush tools like Dodge and Burn, which I don't think I've shown you yet, to pull out some of the some of the detail down in here. I think that what's happening down here needs to be a little lighter, a little brighter, to look like it's close to us, first of all, and also to hold its own. I mean, you've got this wonderful light right back here, but I think your focal area is more in here, and so these plants right here and probably this part of the path right here, I really think needs to be more contrasty, more light, and that comes back to one of those high dynamic range, or selective editing in Photoshop issues. But it's pretty rare, I would say, that you're going to take a picture and like not touch it up at least a little tiny bit. Since you do have all that control with the raw files, a little bit of tweaking. I mean, I want you to get as close as you can to, perfection, or maybe that's too much pressure saying perfection, but as close as you can, so that your tweaks are minimal. But you should probably go in and play with most of them. Maybe it doesn't need editing, but you might want to just like play with each one of them and make sure. Okay, so this is a good example of a diagonal slicing across the horizontal. Here we go, diagonal slicing across vertically. Nice panorama. It's a beautiful sky. It's a little dark in here, and that might be something that changes when I see it in the full size. But I have a feeling that this is an area down here that you could mask out and bring out some highlights in, so that it would still wants to be darker over here, but just so it can kind of hold its own against this nice glowy area right here. I love the atmospheric mist that's happening off in here. It's so soft. And I'll tell you about like taking landscape pictures here in the valley, because of these wonderful skies that we have. A lot of times what I have done is, if I go out and I meter for the sky, it'll everything in the foreground will be a little bit dark, but if I meter for the foreground, the sky's going to be blown out. In my opinion, if you're going to edit something, here's my opinion. It is easier to bring out highlights on something that's underexposed than it is to introduce darks into something that's blown out. And so, what I generally do, it's just like a little um, cheating trick that I found. It might be a little bit lazy, but it worked for me. Um, I sometimes intentionally underexpose. This is only when I'm shooting in RAW, because there's so much pixel information in there that you can make such dramatic changes, just by moving a couple of things around, so that I can like go into Photoshop and selectively start to pull out the highlighted areas and make these things kind of pop out and make them glow. And generally, if I underexpose for the sky just a little bit, I can pull out some highlights where I need them. But generally, like your blues and your purples and your oranges, if you underexpose just a little bit, it makes them that much more dramatic when you lighten up the areas where there's light. So it's something to try. And let's see, I'm looking. You're saying it's warped. It's like, yeah, that's going to happen. These are going to have a little bit of a warpage, but that's part of what makes it interesting and fun. Okay, so very nice work by Annalisa, and on to the next.